Saskatchewan and Alberta just dropped a political bombshell that could split this country wide open. These aren't just any provinces, they're the beating heart of Canada's resource economy. But here's the kicker: Alberta and Saskatchewan are already more plugged into the United States than into the rest of Canada. And right now, they're turning up the heat. Frustration with Ottawa has reached a boiling point, and the idea of breaking away is no longer fringe talk, it's mainstream. Some are even floating the possibility of becoming the 51st and 52nd states of the United States. Let's be clear, their economies don't just trade with the U.S., they depend on it. And yet, what does Ottawa do? Sabotage. Layers of taxes, suffocating regulations, and endless interference. These provinces trade more with the U.S. than with their so-called Canadian partners in the East. If they actually walked away, the fragile balance holding Canada together, from Quebec to British Columbia, could collapse overnight. What just happened wasn't some polite handshake photo op. It was a declaration of intent. For the first time in Canadian history, Alberta and Saskatchewan held a joint government caucus meeting in Lloydminster. Not for coffee, not for donuts, but to send a message loud enough to rattle the windows of Parliament Hill. This wasn't a stunt. This was calculated. This was Alberta and Saskatchewan looking straight at Ottawa and saying, "You've drained our patience. You've drained our money. You've strangled our pipelines. Now we're taking control." Alberta in particular has carried Confederation on its back for decades. Its pipelines power the country. Its wealth bankrolls Ottawa's projects, and yet it's constantly treated like an ungrateful child. Premier Danielle Smith and Premier Scott Moe didn't mince words. They came out swinging, calling out Ottawa's dismissive arrogance and making it clear if the federal government keeps treating them like an ATM, they're more than willing to print their own currency and chart their own course. Think about the scale of this. Alberta is an oil empire disguised as a province. 4.2 million barrels of oil every single day, over 5 billion barrels a year. For perspective, that's more than most OPEC countries produce. Alberta isn't just Canada's gas tank, it's one of the world's great energy hubs. And yet Ottawa lectures Alberta like it's some reckless teenager who forgot to mow the lawn. That arrogance alone tells you everything you need to know about how this country is run. Alberta's energy sector contributes more than $70 billion to Canada's GDP. Alberta's GDP itself is $340 billion, 14% of the entire Canadian economy, produced by just 11% of the population. In any other country, Alberta would be the crown jewel, the golden child, the one getting trophies. But in Canada, Alberta gets the privilege of higher taxes and a constant scolding from the same government that leeches off it. Here's the hard truth. Over the past decade, Alberta has paid $250 billion more in federal taxes than it got back in spending. That's not just unfair. That's robbery. That's financial abuse on a national scale. Meanwhile, Quebec collects $32 billion in equalization payments every single year and still blocks Alberta's pipelines. Ottawa killed Keystone XL, piled on carbon taxes, and then buried Alberta in regulations so absurd they might as well have been written by bureaucrats who've never set foot outside a latte-filled Toronto boardroom. And the message that sends to Albertans is simple: shut up, pay up, and don't you dare complain. But Alberta's not alone. Swing the focus over to Saskatchewan, and you see a province that's quietly carrying just as much weight. Saskatchewan is an agricultural powerhouse, one of the world's leading exporters of wheat, potash, and uranium. And guess where most of it goes? Straight to the United States. So when people act shocked that Saskatchewan might be eyeing the South, spare us the theatrics. Economically, they've been halfway there for years, and just like Alberta, Saskatchewan is being gutted financially. The farmers there are being buried under Ottawa's environmental regulations, rules that make zero sense on the ground. Imagine being told to grow the food that feeds the country, but do it under policies cooked up by urban elites who've never seen a wheat field in their life. The result? Farmers are furious. The rural base is livid. Resentment is the word of the year. Federal equalization payments keep draining wealth from Alberta and Saskatchewan to prop up provinces like Quebec and the Maritimes, which don't contribute nearly as much to the economy. It's like being forced to pay for a family dinner and then being told you can't order dessert because you're being too greedy. It's insulting. And both provinces are done playing nice. That's why Saskatchewan isn't just complaining anymore. They've already gathered more than 0 signatures for an independence referendum. Sure, that's just the beginning, but every movement starts somewhere. And Premier Scott Moe, he's not standing in the way. He's basically saying, if the people want to vote on leaving, I won't stop them. In political language, that's as close to a green light as you'll ever hear. Meanwhile, Alberta's independence push isn't some pie-in-the-sky dream. It's locked in for 2026, and the barrier to entry just collapsed. The threshold for triggering a referendum didn't just get lowered, it plummeted from 640,000 signatures down to 177. That's not a wall. That's a welcome mat. And the Alberta Prosperity Project has already stormed right through it with more than 250 signatures online. The ballot question is blunt, no fluff, no wiggle room. Should Alberta become a sovereign country and cease being a province of Canada? Yes or no? That's it. This isn't about venting frustration anymore. This is about walking out the door. While Alberta is blasting past referendum thresholds, Saskatchewan is lining up right behind them. They need 125,000 signatures to trigger their own independence referendum. And the grassroots campaign is gaining steam fast. People are signing petitions, organizing events, and showing up because this isn't just about politics anymore. It's about dignity. It's about self-respect. It's about saying enough to being treated like the national cash machine Ottawa raids every single tax season. And let's be crystal clear. Legally, they've got the green light. Canada's Clarity Act already allows provinces to separate, no secret handshake required, no backroom deal necessary. All it takes is a clear referendum result and a majority vote. Quebec already proved it, twice. In 1980 and again in 1995. Quebec came within inches of breaking away from Canada. That precedent matters. The law is already on the books. The only missing ingredient is political courage. The timing of this alliance between Alberta and Saskatchewan is no accident. Alberta's referendum is locked in for 2026. And if that button gets pushed, Saskatchewan is perfectly positioned to follow. This isn't just two provinces tossing around empty threats. This is a coordinated strategy. This is two resource giants standing shoulder to shoulder and saying, Ottawa, we've had enough. Now let's talk about the raw numbers that make this so explosive. Alberta and Saskatchewan combined represent nearly 6 million people. That's not a fringe group. That's a serious chunk of Canada's population. And more importantly, together they control 75% of Canada's oil production. That's not just a statistic. That's leverage. That's power. That's the equivalent of a family dinner where Alberta and Saskatchewan provide all the food, cook the meal, pay the bill, and then get told they can't sit at the table. It's absurd. And everyone knows it. And it's not just oil. Saskatchewan's uranium exports power nuclear plants worldwide. Its wheat feeds millions across the globe. Its potash is vital for agriculture everywhere. These provinces are the backbone of Canada's resource economy. But instead of being treated like partners, they're treated like problem children. Instead of respect, they get condescension. Instead of investment, they get strangling regulations. So when people dismiss this movement as fringe, they're either blind or willfully ignorant. These are two provinces that together pump billions into Canada's GDP, only to watch billions siphoned off through equalization payments. Alberta alone has been drained of $250 billion, more than it received back in just the last decade. And what does it get in return? Pipeline cancellations, carbon taxes, and endless lectures from politicians who wouldn't know an oil rig from a fence post. Here's where it gets even more serious. If Alberta and Saskatchewan walk out, Ottawa's budget collapses. We're talking about a near $20 billion shortfall every single year. The federal government's checkbook would suddenly look like a charity case. Without the golden goose of the West, Ottawa's finances would implode. And that's before considering the ripple effects. Because let's not forget Quebec. Quebec has flirted with separation for decades. If Alberta's cash disappears, if equalization payments dry up, you can bet Quebec dusts off its independence playbook again, and this time without Alberta footing the bill. Quebec might actually go through with it. Suddenly, the entire Canadian Confederation doesn't just look shaky, it looks like a memory. And then there's British Columbia. Economically, BC is already tied into the Pacific Northwest. Vancouver trades more with Seattle than it does with Toronto or Ottawa. If the West breaks off, British Columbia may not jump straight into statehood, but it's hard to see it staying tethered to Ottawa's orbit. The gravitational pull of regional economics is too strong. So what happens to what's left of Canada? You're left with an aging population, a politically fractured landscape, and regions utterly dependent on federal aid. Provinces trapped in debt, governments stuck in endless political deadlock. The idea of a strong, united Canada becomes more of a nostalgic story than a functioning reality. And yet Ottawa continues to act like everything's fine. They're still writing press releases about unity. They're still lecturing Albertans and Saskatchewan farmers as if nothing has changed. But on the ground, everything has changed. Independence isn't some fringe fantasy anymore. It's a real, organized, legally viable movement. The Alberta Prosperity Project already has 250 signatures online. well above the threshold needed. Saskatchewan is lining up its own referendum push, and both premiers Danielle Smith and Scott Moe have made it clear they're not standing in the way. That matters. Because when provincial leadership isn't blocking the door, it means the grassroots movement has space to grow unchecked. And it's growing fast. This is why Ottawa should be terrified, because once the momentum of secession builds, it doesn't just stop. It doesn't just fade away. History is full of examples where central governments ignored regional grievances until it was too late. And Canada is now dancing dangerously close to that same edge. This isn't about partisan politics anymore. It's about survival. It's about whether the people who power this country will continue to tolerate being treated as second-class citizens in their own confederation. Alberta and Saskatchewan have drawn their line in the sand. And if Ottawa doesn't start listening, that line could very well turn into a border. The most explosive part of this entire story is how close we are to watching history unfold. Alberta's independence referendum isn't some distant dream. It's locked in. 2026 is just around the corner. The ballot question is brutally simple. Should Alberta become a sovereign country and cease being a province of Canada? Yes or no? No confusing language, no room for interpretation. Just a direct choice. And judging by the hundreds of thousands of signatures already secured, this isn't a fringe gamble, it's a legitimate shot. Saskatchewan's path is unfolding too. They need 125,000 signatures to trigger their referendum. And the momentum is building. Every town hall, every petition drive, every grassroots meeting is one step closer to a moment that could shake the entire foundation of this country. And Premier Scott Moe has said outright that he won't stand in the way. That alone is massive. Political leaders rarely give up that kind of control. For him to essentially say, if the people want this, I won't stop them, is a signal that the political ground beneath Canada's feet is shifting. But what about the so-called federal safeguards? What about Ottawa's ability to keep the country glued together? Well, here's the hard truth. The Clarity Act is not a shield, it's a roadmap. It literally lays out how a province can separate. A clear question, a clear majority, and negotiation follows. Quebec nearly did it twice. Alberta and Saskatchewan know the law is on their side. All it takes is a majority of voters willing to pull the trigger. And this is why the timing matters. Alberta and Saskatchewan aren't just floating this idea in isolation. They're doing it together. They're showing a united front as two resource-rich provinces, side by side, saying, Ottawa, we're done. And when two provinces that collectively produce 3/4 of Canada's oil dominate agriculture and funnel billions into the federal budget, start openly planning their exit. That's not a bluff. That's a plan. Let's not underestimate the factor here either. If Alberta and Saskatchewan declared sovereignty or even moved toward its border, they wouldn't be left stranded. They've already got massive economic integration with the United States. Oil, gas, wheat, potash, uranium. Most of it already flows south. Washington wouldn't hesitate to strike deals. In fact, the U.S. would likely welcome them with open arms as powerful new trade partners, maybe even as future states. And suddenly, Ottawa would be watching its richest provinces embrace its most powerful neighbor. So imagine this scenario. Alberta and Saskatchewan hold their referendums. The votes pass. Negotiations begin. And Ottawa is forced to reckon with the possibility of losing the backbone of its economy. Quebec watches closely. And if Alberta's billions disappear, Quebec doesn't just consider leaving, it likely bolts. British Columbia, already tied economically to the Pacific Northwest, would drift further out of Ottawa's orbit. What's left? A fractured country, aging demographics, a weaker economy, and a federal government desperately trying to hold on to a shrinking confederation. Ottawa keeps talking about unity, but unity doesn't mean much when the foundations are crumbling. You can't keep telling Alberta and Saskatchewan to pay the bills while you block their pipelines. You can't drain $250 billion from one province and then expect loyalty. You can't bury farmers under regulations written by urban elites and then act shocked when they rebel. This is cause and effect, plain and simple. And here's the kicker. Canada's crisis isn't just about economics. It's about respect. Albertans and Saskatchewanians are tired of being treated like second-class citizens. They're tired of being told their industries are dirty. Their contributions are unappreciated. And their voices don't matter. The resentment has been festering for decades, and now it's exploding into a full-blown political movement. So where does this end? If Ottawa keeps ignoring the warning signs, if it keeps acting like Alberta and Saskatchewan are just bluffing, then Canada is heading straight toward a breakup. Wexit, secession, independence, whatever you want to call it. It's no longer a fantasy. It's a live option, backed by real numbers, real signatures, real movements, and real anger. The choice now sits with the people of Alberta and Saskatchewan. Do they want to keep footing the bill for a country that mocks them, drains them, and blocks their future? Or do they want to take control of their own destiny, forge their own path, and maybe even write the next chapter of North American history? Make no mistake, this isn't just another political squabble. This is a turning point. And if Alberta and Saskatchewan follow through, Canada as we know it could vanish in our lifetime.